the most important thing is just to move fast, pick something and go. My point of view is that if the decision's coming to you, it's the most incomplete information. If there is complete information, it wouldn't really be needed. I'm not sure that I'm ready to give AI, full access to my bank account, but I'm definitely ready to say, okay, what should I do? Actually, just plan it all out and give me a button to click just to confirm it.
Ryan, welcome to Fintech Leaders. I'm really happy that we're doing this. How's it going today?
So far, so good. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Ryan, let's hear a little bit about your personal background before we dive into a bunch of topics that we're going to talk about. But, I think it'd be interesting for the audience to learn about your background and how it led you to co-found Credit Karma.
Yeah, in a nutshell. So I'm chief product officer or head of product at Credit Karma today is usually what I like to say. But I was co-founder at Credit Karma many years ago. I was CTO. So I spent a lot of time in tech land. And prior to that, I was at a really small company just out of college, 60 people in Charlotte, North Carolina. It was this really cool little company with people who were just knew each other really well. They were a really tight knit group. And I was there for like 2 months and I got acquired by IBM. And then I was a part of a tight knit 330,000 person organization pretty much overnight. And so I stayed there for a couple of years, but I was looking to do something smaller and where I could have more of an impact. So I was kind of hunting for a startup oriented type thing. I really wanted to do consumer because the thing that I was in was software for big banks. You had like one big bank customer. I thought it'd be more fun to have 100 million customers. So I got acquainted to Ken, our CEO, through some friends, and he convinced me that Credit Karma would be more exciting than IBM. So I took the job.
Now, coming in, there's always this mix of how do your past experiences help you with that initial push of building Credit Karma, but also how much of it you learned on the job. Like, what do you think that you were bringing to the table that helped you? And what are the things that you had to learn on the job?
I was lucky in that I really loved computer security. So I was just interested in that in high school and in college. I spent a lot of time, studying and reading in classes. And then professionally, right when I got out, I started doing stuff in my small company that was, applicable. And I learned a lot at IBM. So that was a really helpful background in a fintech because that's a hard space to just kind of come in and not know anything. So I had a really good background there. In terms of creating a really big scalable web app, I just knew nothing. So, and that was the business. So I pretty much crash coursed. I mean, I read everything. I read every blog. I talked to everyone who would talk to me. I tried a bunch of stuff, a bunch of technologies. And then I think at some point, the most important thing is just to move fast, pick something and go. And so, I really time boxed that stuff. And I picked at the time, that sounds like quaint now, but it was like PHP, it was a lamp stack, right? And the idea behind that was, all the lamp stacks, they've been done so many times, they've scaled so easily. And if you get to the point where that's a problem, then, great. You've already won. It's really easy to get started and then not really get stuck as you scale past the first server to the 10th server. And so I just wanted to hit that 10th server and not be worrying about scaling. And then once you're at the 10th or your 15th or whatever, and you have like real scale problems, well, then you actually have a team who can help solve your stuff for you. So that was what I went with, and it worked out. We don't use it today, but it worked out. MySQL's still out there.
And as a technical leader, we don't hear too often, because as the consumers, and even if it's a B2B product, as the user of the product, you don't get to see too much of the backstory of hard decisions or important decisions that you had to make on the engineering front early on. I think you just gave us one example, but can you remember some like crucial decisions early on that you had to make that turned out to be correct or maybe incorrect? I don't know. That became meaningful later on.
Yeah, we had a bunch of forks in the road. I think one of the biggest ones was that PHP web app. It was modular. We had designed it really well. So it had modules, libraries, it was like pretty sophisticated, but it's still like a big giant code base. It's a giant 3 million line code base in the in the 20 teens. And there was this, we all knew we needed to move the services, and it was just kind of a question of how and when. And that's a discussion that can just go on endlessly, and people prototyping and trying. And eventually we just said, we're going to time box the prototype effort. We're going to get one team going. And then the next year, we're going to get all teams to build one. And then the next year, we're going to move everything. And it was this really aggressive push. And it was hard to make that because the amount of work that it took, and the engineering distraction, and the, oh, but what about, all these different business things we need to do? But in hindsight, it turned out to be the best decision, because we actually made this really aggressive push, and then we were kind of out. We had a monolith that had shrunk to, whatever, how many lines, but it was barely used. It's like a fraction of the traffic. It's kind of niche features we don't care about. And that was really a hard and scary thing to do, because you have to rally the entire org. You're picking a new stack. You got to get people excited about it. You got to train everybody on it. Everyone was like very into functional programming at the time, and I think still are. I mean, I still love it. But we jumped over to Scala, back then, and that's a big jump from PHP. We did not have a lot of people who could write Scala code or read it or had any background at all. So that was a really aggressive choice, but it actually turned out to be great, because people were really excited about it. That was the main thing, like getting people excited to make the change and kind of putting in the extra effort to learn it on their own time because they liked it. That was a big deal.
How'd you get them excited?
We did a lot on training. So we did a whole bunch of making courses available, bringing instructors in. We had competitions, and we stood up like a center of excellence. And then at the time, there was just so much being externally written about functional programming. I think people were really just itching. Some people had some background, others had more of a kind of a typical object-oriented Java type background, and they were itching to try it. And so we kind of used the external environment to get people hyped too, and spent a lot of money to send people to conferences and, make friends. And we just kind of did everything that we could to evangelize, and that went a long way.
Yeah, because the best engineers, they want a challenge, right? They want to build. So it sounds like you tapped into that. Like, this is going to allow you to do even better things.
Yeah, we created excitement. I think that's one of the things that's hardest. And, it's not easy to maintain. You can't be doing that all the time. But for such a massive transformation, I mean, that was a huge deal for us, going from a 3 million line monolith to several hundred services working together. That was a lot, but we did it. It took about 2.5 years to really make the full jump.
Now, this was a big decision, Ryan. I don't know how much information you had, but as a product leader, even as a tech leader, you're more often than not making decisions with incomplete information. Whenever that occurs, how do you evaluate whether to move forward or not? Is there a percentage of information completeness that you look for?
Well, my point of view is that if the decision's coming to you, it's the most incomplete information. If there is complete information, it wouldn't really be needed. It's usually what you're really asking is, what are our priorities over the next couple of years? What does leadership care about, right? What matters? I think that's when there's incomplete information, that's really what it's about. And so, it kind of depends on the time and the place, but like I'll talk about, our transition to cloud was just as big. We started in 2007, we were in data centers. I had to fly to, it was Iowa or something for our first data center audit. And I had to go physically to this data center and like walk up to our actual physical server and be like, yeah, that's the one. Imagine that now. But the transition to cloud was a huge deal in the similar timeframes, like around 2016 or so. And we had to choose, which cloud we were going to go with. And Google Cloud was very nascent, I would say, at the time. No one was really, everyone was AWS. Everyone just said, talked to AWS, did AWS. But our point of view was the thing that really mattered to us at the time was data. That's like the lifeblood of our business. We're a very data oriented business. We use data to make people's financial lives better. It's just critical in everything we do. So like processing it, moving it, all of that stuff, like those are for us, like that's the hard part of the business, managing like the Kubernetes infrastructure or whatever. I'm much less worried about that. I'm much more worried about like how do I actually make the teams productive with the data. And so we took this leap into Google Cloud when they were, I think, pretty immature at the time. And we did it on the back of like, well, we just like the data stack a lot. And we think that's going to be, for us as a business, that's the priority. And that was kind of a hard sell for some people, and that wasn't a thing that people had experience with either. So a lot of folks were like, man, this is going to be a harder road than if we just kind of jumped on to AWS with everybody else. But it worked out. I mean, Google matured over time. And like we predicted, those easy things that everyone was doing, like they just got easier and easier. But the data is never easy. You just always want to be on the cutting edge of that. And we built so much important stuff because we were able to leverage tools like BigQuery that just weren't really available in other stacks.
This is almost a decade ago, sounds like 8 years ago. The stats that I read and hear from the banking industry is that about 80% of the industry is not on the cloud yet. So, still a long ways to go. Those audits are still happening in many organizations.
Yeah, we were just joking the other day about who has that COBOL job still and what that job must be like on that IBM mainframe that's still sitting around somewhere.
Yeah. I think it should pay well, right? Not too many people around with the knowledge.
It's hard to change. I mean, it's not like those systems were all written with the best unit test frameworks and the best testing infrastructure. They just kind of work. It's the same way nuclear reactors are just, it's terrifying to change nuclear code. Nobody wants to touch that ever. And the idea of migrating it, there's no existing test stack that you can just kind of pull in easily. So, if I'm running one of those banks and I'm thinking like, oh, I have to move all my operations, I'd be pretty thoughtful about which systems and when. It's not shocking that there's still quite a bit of old school tech sitting around.
Right. Staying a little bit on the technical side, product and tech organizations, at least the best ones, they're always running experiments, right? They're always testing things that might not see the light of day, or they might turn into a full product. In your career and your years at Credit Karma, have there been any experiment results that have surprised you?
Oh, there's been so many. First, we're very data oriented, and pretty much everything we release goes out in like a little experiment package. So you can see it in essentially real time, like how it's doing and what's happening. I mean, there's a whole bunch of like sophisticated tooling around that is all grown in house. We actually model a lot of it after what Facebook was doing back in the, I don't know, 2012-ish timeline. I actually went there and spoke with some of their folks. I talked to Javier Olvan, actually. I was like, how are you guys doing this? And then we took what they did, some of what Google did, and replicated. So we have a really, really cool experiment stack. Anyway, we have, there's been so many things where we've been surprised. One of the things we've seen consistently is sometimes if you make things too fast, but people don't expect it to be fast, they kind of think that it's dumb. So we could say that there's a lot happening behind the scenes if we're searching for financial products for you. But if I add a slight delay and like have it say like, oh, I'm finding, conversion rates go up. It's very counterintuitive, but that we've seen that several times. People don't always believe, even in the era of Google returning like immediate, results, and tools like Perplexity being as fast as they are. I kind of think AI is training people again to think that, like, hey, if there's not actually some delay, it's not really thinking. And so we're kind of going back to that a little bit, which is
especially with the reasoning models.
Yeah. And customer behavior is, I'm not like a big fan of like moving buttons around and changing colors and stuff. I think you can do a little bit of that optimization, but people way over index on it. It's a little intellectually lazy to spend too much time on it. But if you have a good idea, like through your user research, like, hey, we know that people don't sign up for this product because they're afraid of X. or they are concerned about Y, or they don't. Like an example is we used to have people, and we still have features that are really popular where you have to connect your bank account. And, that's a thing that today people are a little more comfortable with. But, back in like 2010, 2012, people were very uncomfortable with that. And so we knew from research, people were like, oh, I'm afraid to give anyone my password, even though, we'll actually store it, just throw it out, just used to make the connection. And we just essentially made this little change where we just added a lock icon. That's all we did, just add a lock icon in front of the exact same copy, and it boosted conversion rate by like 25%.
Wow.
That one icon, and it was lasting. We actually, what a lot of people do is they throw something out and they have like this A/B test and they shut it down really fast, and then you actually don't see the full effect. We monitor a lot of our tests over a long period of time, so you can actually see that there's a newness effect in any existing experience. It's kind of like if you go into your grocery store and they just kind of move stuff around, merchandising, it gets your attention. And so it brings conversion rates up. And it's not lasting because it will actually burn down again. But that change and some other changes like it are lasting. They actually persist. And then that's a good example where you tend to only experience it once. So it's less likely to have that newness effect.
It sounds like the mentality of people is different when it comes to their finances, because this is so intimate and important. Google results, they can be instantaneous, but figuring out my finances, that should take a little bit of time. This is important.
Yeah, I do think there's something to that. And people regard everything financial a little bit differently in terms of like their level of skepticism for what's happening behind the scenes. And do you really know me? Are you operating in my best interest? And then, is this, everyone knows there's a lot of money in finance. So there's sort of, I think, a natural, kind of thinking that, oh, well, like whatever it is just kind of like out to make money. And so anything to kind of show like, actually, we did work, someone thought about this. And if it's adding a delay that says, hey, we're thinking about it right now, and that convinces you, even though we already did it in the background, of course, because we're trying to do a good job in the engineering and keep latency as low as possible. If that gets it done, then great.
It's no secret that data has become more important than ever, especially in an age of LLMs. You, of course, have incredible amounts of data. I mean, over 100 million customers. How are you envisioning this transformation of Gen AI into financial services? And specifically, how are you guys riding the wave?
Yeah. Well, I said, like, it's easy to get a lot of data. It's hard to use it. It's hard to use it properly. And I think a lot of companies don't invest in that, don't prioritize it. And that's something that we pushed really hard on. We want to make sure that the data is usable. Systems are built around the data. And, the AI is no exception to that. So, we want to make sure that when you're asking the AI question, it actually has the relevant financial information that needs to go and like actually give you a thoughtful answer. And I think some of the challenge can actually be AI is not super opinionated in the way that it speaks a lot of the time. I know a common complaint now that DeepSeek has come out and people are seeing like the comparison from DeepSeek to OpenAI and so on. They're like, hey, some of the American AI seems like I'm talking to my HR rep about a problem. And it's like 20 lines of boilerplate and then kind of a soft suggestion. And then a thanks for asking. And it's not very direct. And if you go to like Reddit personal finance and you ask a question, you get opinionated answers. You get people who are like, this is the way, and it's direct and it's, they might ask you for data to inform their opinion or whatever, but like they have a point of view that's based on something. And so I think that's actually one of the most challenging things is how do you actually take a bunch of data, give it to the AI, and then have it, even though there is imperfect information, because there's no such thing as perfect information, get it to actually give you a more opinionated answer, because that's what people actually are looking for. What's the one that I want? What should I do? Here's everything about me. What should I do right now? And that's really hard to do.
So is that what you would hope to do as a company to be able to automate some of this advice through your own kind of trained models.
Yeah, that's where I want to go. So what I would like is to be a platform that knows you, sees, I've drawn an analogy to kind of like Google Maps. So at first it's like, hey, I know where you are and I know where you're going, and I know a bunch of what's in between. So I'm going to guide you in the best way that, you know, I possibly can. That's step one is, I want to be able to say confidently, like, this is the route that you should take. And you have to build the trust that I know you and the route well enough to make that recommendation. And that's like what I think most financial products just fail at right out of the gate. It's just like, hey, I'm going to recommend you do this thing. Customers are like, well, what are the 3 routes that I didn't take? I'm not convinced that you had the enough information to give them to me. And so you can end up with these solutions that are kind of like, well, here's like all the routes that you could take. And it's like a very hedging kind of like, well, maybe you should do this, maybe you should do that. The vision, I think, is that we want to be able to say, like, hey, this is the one. Do this. We thought about it. Here's why, but do this one. Build a level of trust that you actually know that it's real. And then down the line, you can actually get to like well, I could take it for you, confirm. And eventually it's just, I did this thing. Here's what I did. But you have to build that trust. You wouldn't just, if you had never used Google Maps or MapQuest back in the day, you would not trust a self-driving car. You'd be like, what, how is this even, you wouldn't even have a conceptualization of how this could possibly work. But we've all gotten very comfortable with like, well, the navigation, like that's a solved problem. It's not going to like run me off off of a dead end. And so now you just have to get confident that, it could take the next step and the next step, it's like assisted self-driving. And then, so you're in the car and you're seeing what it's going to do, but you can kind of like take over, and then you need to kind of like take the next step. And so the long-term vision is that we're able to do the full thing for you. We can actually just do it in the background, this fully like agentic platform that's just like, well, I know what you should do right now. You're paying too much. I'm going to refinance. I refinanced. It's done. Here you go. And then I already set up the bill pay for you. Because that's obviously the next step, right? You refinance something, you're going to get a new bill, you're going to have to go to the website, you're going to have to set up the automatic bill pay. It's like, why? AI could do all of that for you. You just have to trust it enough to get to that point.
Do you have any hopes or predictions in terms of how long is it going to take us to get to like a fully agentic financial advisor?
I think the fully agentic thing where you actually let it take over is a ways away. I think there will be to discrete actions quicker, much quicker. I think within the next, few years, you're going to see all kinds of automated experiences that thread, A to Z on this kind of one topic, but can't necessarily kind of go the full breadth. And I think that the challenge is going to be, it's like, it's hard to get confident with your money and moving the money. I'm not sure that I'm ready to give AI, full access to my bank account, but I'm definitely ready to say, okay, what should I do? And actually just plan it all out and give me a button to click just to confirm it. I'm very ready for that. I think everybody's ready for that actually. And then from there, I don't know how long till people actually like fully trust it. I think they'll have to see more external indication that, these systems are coming along and are more and more trustworthy and, are hallucinating less and so on. That takes time, but, I always draw a comparison to mobile. I mean, the iPhone when it came out was not great. It was very cool relative to everything else at the time, but it was slow. It didn't really multitask well. There were not apps for quite some time. The first apps weren't very good. It took a while before everyone had that phone in their pocket and their whole life revolved around it. This feels like it's going even faster.
Yeah, I played around a little bit with OpenAI's operator, right? ChatGPT operator. And I freaked me out a little bit, but I tried moving $1 from my bank account, right? And it did it, but it took a few iterations, and then I changed my password, of course, after that. But he can do it, if you give it enough direction and guardrails. And this is I'm I'm non-technical by any means, so if I can do it, I'm sure we're closer to that world than we imagine.
Yeah, and we have lots of internal features in development where I'm like, wow, it's pretty impressive. Like right out of the gate, it's kind of amazing what it can do. The tricky stuff is the edge cases, all the weird little things. It's like, why am I not in a self-driving car everywhere yet? Because we've had that technology for some time, and it's like there's a lot of edge cases that they have to figure out before they can really roll out to everybody. And that's why I think you'll see lots of discrete end-to-end things before it's quite like operating across all.
So building that trust with the user, with your customers, takes time. And I think one of the main things that you have done at Credit Karma is you've also, to build that trust, you've built a very strong brand in the industry. And that brand results in trust because it's a trusted brand, but it's known, it's validated. Maybe could you share a little bit of the steps that you took internally as a team to build that brand? Was it very deliberate?
It was, and especially in the 2007, 2008 era, the credit market was in particular disliked because there were all these sites like freecreditreport.com and free credit scores and all of these things where they're just free, 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 and then it wasn't free, right? It was free for a moment, and then it was like $20 a month. It would be like light blue text on a dark blue background or something crazy where you wouldn't notice what it was. And as a breakage model, you would call up, and I did this to a bunch of them to see what the experiences were like. You'd call up, and they'd have the automated phone menu, and it'd be like option 1, option 2, option 3. And you're waiting to see what and then it would wait like 10 seconds, and it'd be like option 9 to cancel. And it was so extreme. And people don't necessarily have the best opinion of credit and the financial space in general, and then they go through that experience. And then so you're trying to advertise that you're truly a free credit product. That's a pretty hard thing to do. And so one of the principles that we had right out of the gate was that we're going to give people what they want right away. Like when we ask you for information, part of your sign up process, it's like you got to give your last 4 of your social and stuff like that. Back then it was your full social. And then we said, hey, after that, we're just going to immediately show you your credit information. There will be nothing in between you and that information, because it just builds trust right away. They're like, hey, we're going to give you the thing that you wanted. And that's been a principle, I think, for a very long time. Like, let's not stand in front of the thing that the customer wants. Let's connect them to value as fast as possible, and then help them build on that in whatever way we can. What I see a lot of companies do is they actually do the opposite. It's like, well, what can we put in front of the value to get you to do more stuff before you reach the value? And it's this kind of like erosion of trust over time. And, it's been, I think it's a challenge, right? As you become big and public, and there are metrics to hit and, things to reach. But, even still to this day, that credit score is like right there. It's like the first thing that you see on the dashboard. And we've always been really thoughtful about, what are people here for, and how do we make sure that they just get it as fast as they can.
And when you think of other companies that have tried building a brand, but maybe haven't done such a great job, what is important to keep in mind? Obviously, sounds like giving the customers what they want and being transparent. But are there other lessons that you've learned of maybe what not to do?
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of ways in which you can overcomplicate your product. And I don't think we've always stayed on the right side of that ourselves. But, that also kind of like erodes trust over time. And then, language matters a lot. You have to be really thoughtful about, what is your brand tone, and how do you talk about the product? And that was something we actually spent quite a bit of time on, early when we were trying to, how do you say free when everyone says free? How do people get any confidence that you are who you say you are, and you're going to do what you say you're going to do? One of the ways that we did that was we had a commercial where back then those sites used to do like these 30-day cancellation things. So if you cancel your credit thing within 30 days, you don't have to pay. And we actually did a commercial where someone had a calendar and they were counting down the days. Like she's like, hey honey, what day do we have to cancel that free credit thing on? It was, so we tried to just tap into this experience that people had. And I think that the problem a lot of products have is you're so in it, you kind of forget what people's actual lived experience is. So you can't tap into it. like all your language actually revolves around your internal language. It's like, well, we talk about the product this way, so it just kind of bleeds into the product. And you have to remind yourself that's not how people actually talk about this stuff. Like they don't use those terms. They don't use those words. That's not their lived experience. You have to like try to continuously reconnect to them. And for us, our employees are, a lot of them are, and especially at the start of the company, when we began, we were all Bay Area. And so for them to connect with people who were like all of these different socioeconomic backgrounds, people who, had 500 credit scores. We didn't hire anybody with a 500 credit score, I'm sure, back then, is hard. So you have to really force people out of their box to go like talk to these customers and see, how do they actually talk? How do they think about this stuff?
You mentioned you went back way to 2008, 2009. That's obviously the years of the global financial crisis. I mean, you've gone through a bunch of macro crises. Have those been actually catalysts that have helped Credit Karma, or did you actually experience some really tough situations while you were going through the downturns?
It's interesting. It's both. So yeah, we were kind of born in fire almost there. We started in 2007. We launched the product in 2008. So, what a disaster, right? And then the interesting thing is you can't monetize a product that is really focused on lending and kind of monetizes by connecting people to better lending solutions if nobody is lending. So that's a pretty big problem. Investors are not lining up. I think we talked to there's like 42 investors or something for our Series A, and just no after no after no. It's just unbelievable. And so making money was impossible, and raising money was impossible. But the consumer demand was great because in a downturn, people care a lot about what they're finding. You're checking a lot. You're like really on top of it. And that happened in COVID as well. So in COVID, lending contracted really aggressively because banks, get shy and they pull it all back. And then, our revenue goes down because we're not, connecting people to as many products, but our engagement went through the roof. And so we had actually a big tailwind of that engagement kind of like coming out of COVID and this pent up demand for all these products that we were saying like, hey, well, you need to we can see that you need a personal loan. We can see it's better. You can't get it yet, but stick around. It will be here someday. And so, yeah, it's always been this funny double-edged sword for us that the, consumer demand and consumer engagement goes way up and actually you build a ton of trust in that downturn. And then when it all comes back, there's all this money to be made.
Sounds like that Series A was tough.
It was so brutal. The Series A was so demoralizing at the time. I think we were only raising like $10 million and we finally got a term sheet and someone wanted we were raising $2 million on like a tiny valuation. And we got this term sheet with like 60% of the company. We were like, get out of here. We'll just tighten our belts. It was pretty tough. And then eventually we are connected with QED, which is Nigel Morris's fund. And coming out of Capital One, he really got what we were doing. He really saw the potential. He was like, this could be a big deal. And they actually gave us some, reasonable terms and were great partners and board members for a really long time. So we're indebted to them, I think, for, helping us get through that crisis back in, it was like 2010. We lasted until 2010. It was pretty wild.
Yeah, I drove to Virginia 2 months ago and we sat down for an interview with Nigel. He was great. He's great, obviously. Very cool. I gotta ask, Ryan, you get acquired in 2020 as one of the biggest fintech acquisitions in the market, but yet you're still building at Credit Karma. It's not a criticism. It's like, clearly, you enjoy what you do. Maybe kind of share a little bit of the before, after, and why are you still there?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually get that question a lot. I'm 4 years in now because we closed a touch over 4 years ago. And really, I mean, there's just a bunch of stuff that we always wanted to do, but I couldn't quite do. And some of it was because we just didn't have the tech to do it. I always wanted something that could kind of look at your holistic financial situation and then make recommendations to you, like in all kinds of niche scenarios. And we tried to build it a bunch of times, but it's just there's like way too much for any kind of like state machine to process there and then actually articulate to you that like what it did made sense. This whole Gen AI thing came at an interesting time because I was like, this could be a chance to actually see if we could build some of that stuff and get it right. That was kind of exciting. I think I was really interested in that. And then, it's kind of like your baby, when you start something like this. I wanted to make sure that, where we ended up was a good place for everybody, that the folks working there were like excited about the direction and that we had built a strong bond with the parent company so we could actually work together with Intuit to build better stuff. And, it is a unique opportunity because Intuit has a lot of data and a lot of really great infrastructure that we can lean on, which is also interesting to me because like, I don't, I spent a lot of time on cloud and I could tell you a lot about envelope encryption. I wish I couldn't tell you a lot about envelope encryption. that's, just, that is not central to my business, and I was, I'm pretty eager to kind of say like, hey, Intuit, like, why don't you guys, you guys can think about this stuff and like, we will work with your data team to make sure that we're leveraging all the data that you have, which is a lot because we can see, like your, potentially like tax information could be, part of our, like big financial engine. I mean, imagine like you have this one holistic AI advisor and it knows like what, your history and your taxes, your income, like what's you spend, what's your cash flow, what's your credit like. I mean, it's amazing. Like there's no way that you could ever go to Reddit and be like, I'm such and such, like here's my situation and like be better than that. That's pretty cool. And so, that's why I, stuck around. I just thought it'd be fun to build something.
And Ryan, do you consider yourself a productive person?
That's interesting. Yeah. I don't know. I'm probably self-critical. Everyone else, I think would say that I'm like hyper productive and not good at relaxing, but that even when I'm relaxing, I'm like doing something, but I'm always like, I don't think I'm that productive. I spend a lot of time on hobbies.
And so what do you do when you feel that you are productive? What do you do to be productive?
I used to have all these complex systems and, I was just talking to people about their like Notion productivity system this weekend and other people have like their inbox zero and all this stuff. And I have like at many times just on a weekend been like, I'm going to redesign everything and like come up with a new workflow. And I feel like it always degrades to basically one Google Doc where I just have in the Google Doc various lists and it's just, I'm like skimming around quickly and so much stuff just trends in that direction. And no matter what I do, that seems to be where I end up. And I am super organized in how I do things, like just kind of throughout my life. So like, I'm not a person who will ever lose their keys. Like there's always a place for the keys. There's always a place where if I'm doing a board presentation, this is where all the board notes will be. I'm very much like that. My wife is not like that at all. And she thinks it just kind of drives her crazy sometimes. But for me, I think the best way to be productive is to not have to think about stuff because it's always where you expect it to be.
So I'm guessing you love checklists.
I have a lot of checklists. I do have a lot of checklists. It's true. Well, and I reorder their priority very often. I just kind of like glance at them every morning. I'm like, what's the highest priority one now? Make sure I do that one first.
Yeah, checklists are awesome. I love checklists. Good stuff. And Ryan, so are there any books that you've enjoyed that you recommend often?
One of the ones that I really like is Sapiens. Like I always recommend Sapiens to people because I just think it's so interesting and kind of gives you some insight, I think, into how big groups think. And then kind of randomly, we got a puppy and I was really into dog training for a really long time. This is one of my many hobbies. I apprenticed, I had like certificates, I had all kinds of stuff. I had a dog that knew 40 something words and all kinds of tricks, every trick under the sun. And just now that we got this new puppy, I was checking out some of the books that I had read, years ago. And Reaching the Animal Mind by Karen Pryor, I think it's such a good primer for people into like how behavior really works across species and, what you're really doing when you're training. And I think the more you kind of learn about the mechanics of animal behavior, the more you start to recognize in yourself all these different things that you sort of take for granted are like, oh, I operate that way. You can look at a frustration curve and be like, oh, that's where I am on the curve. Explain so much.
So it sounds like by trying to learn about dogs, you actually learned a lot about yourself.
Yeah, I think so. And so much of just, so many things come down to the basics of biology and behavior.
We're all animals after all. Good stuff. Well, Ryan, I mean, listen, a lot of deep admiration for what you and the team have built. Few people get to that stage where you're serving over 100 million customers. So big congratulations to you, and especially thank you for joining us. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in this conversation from you. So I'm gonna have to re-listen and take a lot of notes.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you, Ryan.
The Fintech Leaders podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.